Bear cub was being sucked by a giant fan. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The abandoned lumber mill at the edge of Pine Hollow hadn't seen activity in nearly a decade, its weathered walls standing as a reminder of better days. But on this particular autumn morning, the silence was broken by the whir of machinery. Zara Quinn, a wildlife researcher with tired eyes and a determined spirit, had set up a temporary station in the old office to monitor the local black bear population. The massive industrial fan she'd found in the storage room now roared to life, clearing out years of dust and providing much-needed ventilation in the stuffy space. Outside, beneath a canopy of gold and crimson leaves, little Milo Jenkins giggled as his mother spread a blanket on the grass. At just 14 months old, Milo's curiosity knew no bounds. His chubby fingers reached for everything, his bright blue eyes widening with each new discovery. Clara Jenkins smiled at her son, grateful for the peaceful morning and the chance to catch up on her field notes while Milo explored the safe confines of their picnic spot. "Stay where Mommy can see you, little explorer," Clara murmured, ruffling Milo's wispy brown hair. She'd chosen this spot carefully, far enough from the mill to be safe, but close enough to keep an eye on her equipment. As a single mother and dedicated biologist, Clara had become an expert at balancing her work and parenthood. Neither Clara nor Milo noticed the small shadow moving through the underbrush just beyond their picnic area. A bear cub, no more than 3 months old, had wandered away from its mother. Its chocolate-colored fur blended with the fallen leaves as it followed the scent of Clara's lunch. The cub's mother had been tracked by Zara's team the previous week, a magnificent black bear they'd named Willow, known for her protective nature and the distinctive white patch on her chest. The air carried a hint of coming rain, the clouds gathering in thick gray masses above the trees. Zara stepped outside the mill to check the weather, adjusting the settings on the industrial fan to maximum before heading back inside. The powerful machine's suction increased dramatically, creating a vortex of air that pulled leaves and small debris toward its protective grill. Milo crawled to the edge of the blanket, entranced by a monarch butterfly that danced just beyond his reach. Clara glanced up from her notes, smiling at her son's wonder. "That's a butterfly, Milo. Can you say butterfly?" Milo babbled happily in response, pushing himself to his feet with surprising steadiness. Clara beamed with pride as he took one wobbly step, then another, following the butterfly's erratic path. The bear cub, meanwhile, had discovered a half-eaten granola bar wrapper at the edge of the picnic area. Distracted by the shiny packaging, it didn't notice how close it had wandered to the old mill. The wrapper slipped from its paws, caught in a sudden gust of wind, and sailed toward the building. The curious cub followed, unaware of the danger ahead. A crack of thunder rolled across the sky, startling both Milo and the cub. Clara looked up with concern, beginning to gather her belongings. "Time to go home, sweetie. The storm's coming in fast." But Milo had spotted something far more interesting than the butterfly, his eyes locked on the small, furry creature now visible at the edge of the clearing. The bear cub stood frozen, its round ears perked up at the sound of Milo's excited squeal. For a breathless moment, child and cub stared at each other across the clearing, two young souls meeting in unexpected recognition. Then the wind shifted, and the granola wrapper flew directly toward the industrial fan. The cub bounded after it, drawn by instinct and curiosity. "Milo, come here," Clara called, suddenly noticing the bear cub. Her heart raced as she scanned the trees for the mother bear, knowing how dangerous coming between a bear and her cub could be. "Milo, please." But Milo had already taken off in his unsteady gait, following the cub with delighted determination. Each wobbly step brought him closer to the mill, closer to danger neither child nor cub could comprehend. Inside the mill, Zara pored over her data, headphones blocking out the rumble of thunder and the increasing roar of the fan. She didn't hear the soft padding of the cub's paws as it approached the building, didn't see the metal grate that had rusted away on the lower half of the fan's housing. A gap just large enough for a small bear cub to be pulled through. The cub reached the mill, nose twitching at the strange mechanical scent. The wrapper fluttered just ahead, dancing in the powerful suction of the fan. One more bound, and the cub would have it. One more bound, and everything would change. Clara dropped her notes, racing after Milo with terror clawing at her throat. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, splattering against the ground and dampening her son's hair as he toddled toward the old mill, toward the bear cub, toward the massive fan that hummed with dangerous power. "Milo, stop!" Clara screamed, but her voice was lost in a crash of thunder. The cub pounced for the wrapper, its small body suddenly caught in the fan's powerful pull. A frightened yelp escaped as the cub's paws scrabbled against the ground, trying to escape the invisible force dragging it backward. The wrapper disappeared into the fan with a tiny flutter, and the cub's hind legs lifted off the ground, its body being sucked slowly, inexorably toward the gap in the grate. Milo stopped, his blue eyes wide with confusion as he watched the struggling cub. Something was wrong. The fuzzy creature that had looked so playful was now making scary noises, its body moving strangely toward the big machine. Clara was only steps behind Milo now, her arms outstretched to grab him, when she saw the cub's predicament. In the distance, a low, rumbling growl cut through the sound of the storm. Willow had realized her cub was missing, and she was coming to find it. Time seemed to slow as Clara processed the danger from all sides, the fan that threatened the cub, the mother bear that would attack anything near her baby, and her own child standing in the middle of it all. But before she could reach him, Milo did something that would change everything. He opened his mouth and let out the loudest, most piercing wail Clara had ever heard him make. The sound cut through the storm like a lightning bolt, echoing against the mill's weathered walls. Inside the building, Zara ripped off her headphones, the hairs on her arms standing on end. That cry wasn't just any cry. It was the distinctive sound of a child in distress. She jumped to her feet, knocking over her chair in her rush to the door. Outside, the cub's claws scraped desperately against the ground, leaving deep furrows in the mud as its body inched closer to the fan. Its frightened whimpers grew more frantic as the suction pulled its hindquarters off the ground. Just 10 more seconds, and the gap in the grate would claim it. Clara lunged forward, her fingers grazing Milo's shirt, but the sudden movement on the slick grass sent her sprawling. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, watching in horror as Milo took another step toward the struggling cub instead of away from it. "No, Milo, stop," she gasped, struggling to her feet. But Milo wasn't listening, his face scrunched in determination. He planted his chubby legs firmly and continued his piercing wail. The sound seemed to resonate with something primal in the cub, whose panicked thrashing paused for just a moment that would make all the difference. From the tree line, a dark shape emerged, moving with surprising speed for its size. Willow's massive form crashed through the underbrush, her eyes locked on her cub, her teeth bared in maternal fury. The rain plastered her black fur to her muscular frame, making her look even more formidable as she charged toward her baby. At the mill's entrance, Zara froze at the sight before her. A child standing mere feet from a bear cub caught in the fan's pull, a woman scrambling in the mud, and a mother bear charging directly toward them all. Her hand flew to the bear spray on her belt, knowing even as she gripped it that it would be useless against Willow's protective rage at this distance. "The fan!" Zara shouted over the storm. "I need to shut off the fan." She disappeared back into the building, racing toward the power controls on the far wall. Her boots slipped on the dusty floor as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. The control panel seemed impossibly distant, the seconds stretching like hours. Outside, Clara finally regained her footing, mud covering her clothes as she made another desperate lunge for Milo. This time her fingers closed around the back of his shirt, but instead of pulling him away, she found herself strangely hesitating. Something in her son's stance, in his unwavering focus on the cub, made her pause. Milo's wail changed pitch, becoming something less panicked and more purposeful. His little hands reached out toward the cub, not in an attempt to touch it, but as if he were trying to show it something. To Clara's astonishment, the cub's eyes locked with her son's, and its desperate struggling calmed just enough for its claws to catch on a protruding root in the ground. The root wouldn't hold for long against the fan's powerful suction, but it gave the cub precious seconds. Seconds that allowed Clara to make a decision that went against every instinct she had as a mother. Instead of yanking Milo away, she dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping one arm securely around his waist while stretching her other arm toward the cub. Her fingers dug into the mud, creating a small barrier that deflected some of the fan's pull away from the cub's face, giving it a chance to breathe. "Hold on," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Milo, the cub, or herself. Willow was less than 20 yards away now, her thunderous charge slowing as she processed the strange tableau before her. A human woman and child, not threatening her cub, but somehow trying to help it. Bears are intelligent creatures, capable of complex decision-making, and something about Clara's protective posture resonated with Willow's own maternal instincts. The massive bear slowed to a stop, huffing great clouds of steam in the cool rain, her eyes never leaving her cub. She rose onto her hind legs, 7 feet of muscle and protective fury, trying to understand what was happening to her baby. Inside the mill, Zara finally reached the control panel, her fingers fumbling with the switches. Come on," she muttered, scanning the faded labels. Which one controlled the fan? The previous owners had left no manual, no instructions, and the labels had worn away years ago. Making a desperate choice, she slammed her hand down on the largest switch, praying she wouldn't plunge the building into darkness instead of stopping the fan. The lights flickered ominously, but stayed on. The fan, however, gave a mechanical groan and began to slow, not stopping completely, but reducing its power enough that the cub's body sank back to the ground. It wasn't enough, though. The suction still pulled at the small bear, dragging it inch by inch toward the damaged grate. Clara saw her chance. With Milo securely held against her side, she stretched out further, her fingers closing around a fallen branch. With a strength born of desperation, she jammed the branch into the ground directly in front of the cub, creating a more substantial barrier against the pull. "Grab on," she urged, as if the cub could understand her words. Whether by instinct or understanding, the cub's paws clutched at the branch, its claws digging deep into the bark. For a moment, it seemed like they had reached a stalemate, the fan pulling, the cub holding, Clara and Milo watching with bated breath. Then, from the edge of the clearing came a new sound, the rumble of an engine. Through the curtain of rain appeared the battered pickup truck belonging to Silas Reed, the elderly caretaker of the forest preserve. His rheumy eyes widened at the scene before him, but decades in the wilderness had taught him not to waste time with questions when action was needed. He gunned the engine, positioning his truck between Willow and Clara, creating a barrier that would give them precious seconds if the mother bear decided to charge. Then, grabbing his rifle from the rack behind his seat, he fired a single shot into the air. The sound cracked like thunder, causing everyone, human and bear alike, to flinch. In that moment of distraction, the cub's grip on the branch slipped, and with a terrified yelp, it was dragged another foot toward the fan. "No!" Milo cried, the first real word Clara had ever heard him speak. Her son's face crumpled in anguish, his small body straining toward the cub as if by sheer force of will he could stop what was happening. Silas was out of his truck now, moving with surprising agility for a man in his 70s. "The circuit breaker," he shouted to Zara, who had appeared at the mill entrance again. On the outside wall. The red box. Zara's eyes lit with understanding. She sprinted around the corner of the building, her boots slipping in the mud. The circuit breaker box was partially hidden beneath years of creeping ivy, but the faded red paint was just visible through the greenery. She tore at the plants with her bare hands, heedless of the thorns that scratched her skin. Inside the mill, the fan gave another mechanical groan, this one deeper and more ominous. The ancient machine had never been designed to run continuously at maximum power, and something in its internal workings had begun to fail. Metal screeched against metal as one of the massive blades caught on the housing, sending a shower of sparks onto the dusty floor. Clara saw the sparks through the gap in the grate, and realized with horror that a new danger was emerging. The decades-old sawdust that covered the mill floor was catching the sparks, tiny embers glowing in the dim light. If a fire started, they would all be trapped between the flames and Willow. The cub was now just inches from the grate, its strength failing as it clung to the branch with one paw. Its dark eyes, so much like its mother's, were wide with terror. Willow sensed the new danger, too. Her massive head swung toward the mill, nostrils flaring at the faint scent of smoke. A low, rumbling growl built in her chest, her powerful muscles tensing for a charge. Not at Clara and Milo this time, but at the building itself, at the machine that was threatening her cub. Silas saw it coming. "She's going to charge," he warned, raising his rifle again. His weathered finger hesitated on the trigger. He'd spent his life protecting these forests and their inhabitants. The thought of shooting Willow, even to save human lives, made his heart ache. But if she charged the mill now, with the fan still running and sparks flying— "Wait," Clara called out, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Just wait." In that moment of suspended action, Milo twisted in his mother's grasp, his small face set in a determination far beyond his years. Before Clara could stop him, he'd wriggled free and was tottering toward the cub on unsteady legs. "Milo!" Clara screamed, lunging after him. But something extraordinary happened next. As Milo approached, his hand outstretched, the cub stopped struggling against the pull. Their eyes met, innocent blue meeting wild brown, and some unspoken communication seemed to pass between them. The cub went still, conserving its strength, as if it somehow understood that this strange, small human was trying to help. Willow, too, paused in her charge, her maternal instinct warring with her confusion at this tiny human approaching her cub. At the circuit breaker box, Zara finally tore away enough ivy to reach the rusty latch. She flung open the metal door and stared at the array of switches inside. Unlike the unlabeled controls inside, these were marked with faded but legible text. Her eyes frantically scanned the options until she found what she was looking for: main power. Without hesitation, she threw the switch. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The fan died with a whining descent in pitch, its blades slowing in a gradually decreasing spin. The suction that had held the cub captive disappeared, leaving the small bear sprawled on the ground, panting heavily, one paw still clutching the branch Clara had provided. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Milo stood just feet from the cub, his hand still outstretched. Clara crouched behind him, ready to snatch him to safety. Silas kept his rifle raised, though pointed away from Willow, and Zara leaned against the circuit box, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Then Milo did something that would be retold in Pine Hollow for generations to come. He plopped down on his bottom in the mud, looked at the exhausted cub, and let out a sweet, bubbling laugh. The sound broke the tension like sunshine through storm clouds. The cub's ears perked up, its head tilting in curious response to this strange noise. It took one tentative step away from the now silent fan, then another, moving not toward its watching mother but toward Milo. Clara's heart threatened to beat out of her chest. "Milo," she whispered, "stay very still, baby." But Milo, with the fearless wisdom of the very young, simply held out his hand, palm up, the way Clara had taught him to offer treats to their neighbor's friendly golden retriever. The cub sniffed the air, taking another hesitant step forward. 5 feet away. 4. 3. Willow huffed, taking a step forward herself, prompting Silas to tighten his grip on the rifle. But the mother bear wasn't charging. She was watching, assessing, her powerful maternal instinct telling her something that her wild nature couldn't quite comprehend, that this tiny human meant her cub no harm. 2 feet away, 1. The cub's nose touched Milo's outstretched fingers, its breath warm against his skin. Milo giggled again, the pure sound of it cutting through the tension like a knife. And then, in a moment that none of the adults present would ever forget, the cub made a soft whuffling sound and licked Milo's hand. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Beside the truck, Silas lowered his rifle, his weathered face slack with wonder. Zara took an unconscious step forward, her researcher's mind struggling to process what she was seeing. A wild bear cub, interacting peacefully with a human child while its mother looked on without aggression. It was impossible. It was miraculous. It was happening right before their eyes. The peaceful moment was shattered by a sharp crack from inside the mill. One of the fan's damaged blades had finally broken free, crashing into the ancient machinery with a sound like a gunshot. Sparks flew in a shower of golden light, and this time they found purchase. A pile of sawdust near the fan burst into flame. "Fire!" Zara shouted, already sprinting back toward the mill entrance. The whole place could go up. The cub, startled at the noise and the sudden movement, skittering backward toward its mother. Willow dropped to all fours, her focus shifting to the new threat as smoke began to billow from the mill's open door. Clara scooped Milo into her arms, backing toward Silas and the truck. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice tight with renewed fear. "If that fire spreads to the forest—" Silas was already on his ancient radio calling for help. "Fire at the old Harmon mill," he barked into the receiver. "Need fire crews and wildlife management stat." Zara reappeared at the mill entrance, coughing, her face smudged with soot. "It's spreading fast," she called. "The old wood is going up like kindling." The situation had transformed in an instant from one danger to another. The cub was safe from the fan, but now they all faced a more immediate threat. Forest fires in this region could devastate thousands of acres, endangering not just wildlife, but the small communities scattered throughout Pine Hollow. As if sensing the human's distress, Willow made a grunting sound to her cub. The little bear immediately scrambled to its mother's side, pressing against her protective bulk. But instead of retreating into the forest as Clara expected, Willow stood her ground, watching the growing flames with what could only be described as calculation. "She knows," Zara breathed, a note of awe in her voice despite the danger. "She understands about the fire." Clara clutched Milo tighter, her mind racing. They needed to leave, to get to safety, but the main road back to town ran past the mill and was already being cut off by the spreading smoke. The only other path was a narrow hiking trail that led deeper into the forest, directly through Willow and her cub's territory. "What do we do?" she asked, looking between Zara and Silas. "We can't go back the way we came, and we can't go forward with them blocking the path." Silas's weathered face set in grim lines. "Fire crews won't get here for at least 20 minutes. By then, half the forest could be ablaze." "We have to try to contain it ourselves," Zara decided, already moving toward the back of the Silas's truck where several tools lay beneath a tarp. "There's a creek about 50 yards behind the mill, if we can create a firebreak." Clara looked down at Milo, who was watching the bears with fascination rather than fear. Then she made a decision that went against every conventional wisdom about wildlife encounters. "I think they'll let us pass," she said quietly. I think they understand we're trying to help." Silas and Zara exchanged incredulous looks. "That's not how this works," Silas said gently. "They're wild animals, Clara. No matter what just happened with the cub, Willow's instinct will be to protect her baby, not help us." "Look at her," Clara insisted. "She's not running, not charging. She's watching the fire, just like we are." Indeed, Willow's attention seemed split between the growing flames and the humans, her massive head swinging back and forth as if weighing options. "Even if you're right," Zara argued, "we can't risk it, not with Milo." The smoke was thickening now, the crackling of flames growing louder as the fire found new fuel inside the mill. They were running out of time. "We have to try something," Clara said, desperation edging into her voice. "We can't just stand here and watch the forest burn." And then, as if on cue, rain began to fall again, not the gentle patter from before, but a sudden drenching downpour that seemed to come out of nowhere. The dark clouds that had been gathering all morning finally broke, releasing a torrent that drummed against the ground with stunning force. Steam rose from the mill roof as the cold rain hit the heat of the growing fire. For a moment, it seemed like nature itself had intervened to save them. But Zara's expression remained grim. "It won't be enough," she called over the roar of the rain. "Not for a building fire. It might slow the spread, but once a structure that old starts burning—" A deep, thunderous crack interrupted her, followed by the groaning of ancient timbers. Part of the mill's roof collapsed inward, sending a plume of sparks and smoke billowing into the sky despite the rain. Willow's head jerked up at the sound, her powerful muscles tensing. The cub pressed closer to her side, whimpering softly. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with Milo secure in her arms, she took a deliberate step toward the bears. "Clara, no!" Silas warned, raising his rifle again. "Don't!" But Clara kept moving, her steps slow and measured. "It's okay," she said, her voice pitched low and calm. "It's okay, we just need to get past you. We need to help stop the fire." Willow watched her approach, black eyes unreadable, massive body perfectly still, except for the rise and fall of her breathing. 3 yards away, 2, 1. Clara stopped, standing close enough to see the individual droplets of rain clinging to Willow's fur. Close enough to smell the wild, musky scent of her. Close enough for the bear to kill her and Milo with one swipe of her powerful paw. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Willow huffed softly, then took one deliberate step to the side, clearing just enough space on the path for Clara to pass. Behind her, Clara heard Zara's sharp intake of breath, but she didn't turn around. Her eyes stayed locked with Willow's, a silent understanding passing between two mothers. "Thank you," Clara whispered, then carefully edged past, keeping Milo's curious face turned toward her shoulder. Once they were safely past, Willow moved back to the center of the path, effectively separating Clara and Milo from Silas and Zara. "Go on," Clara called back to them. "Take the road. We'll be faster on the trail, and the bears won't hurt us." Silas and Zara hesitated, clearly torn between following Clara's inexplicable confidence and taking the safer, longer route. Another section of the mill collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a shower of burning debris onto the grass nearby. Despite the rain, several small fires immediately sprang up, hungrily devouring the dry undergrowth beneath the surface moisture. "No time to argue," Silas decided, grabbing Zara's arm. "You take the truck and go for help. I'll follow them on foot." Zara nodded, already sprinting for the driver's side door. The ancient pickup roared to life as she threw it into gear, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. She took off down the road, the truck disappearing into the curtain of rain within seconds. Silas turned back to the path, only to find Willow still standing there, watching him with those intelligent eyes. The old caretaker had spent decades in these woods, had encountered bears more times than he could count, but he'd never seen one behave like this. "Go on, then," he murmured, taking a step closer. "Let me pass, too." Willow regarded him for a long moment, rain streaming off her thick fur. Then, to Silas's amazement, she huffed again and stepped aside, just as she had for Clara. Not questioning his good fortune, Silas hurried past, catching up to Clara and Milo on the trail ahead. Together they raced toward the creek, the sound of the burning mill receding behind them, replaced by the drumming of rain on leaves and the soft squelch of mud beneath their feet. "I've never seen anything like that," Silas panted as they ran. "In 40 years in these woods, I've never—" "I know," Clara replied, shifting Milo's weight in her arms. The toddler was surprisingly calm, his eyes wide but curious as they moved deeper into the forest. "I can't explain it either." Behind them came the soft pad of paws, and Clara turned to see Willow and her cub following at a distance. Not pursuing, not threatening, just following. "They're coming with us," she said softly, wonder in her voice. Silas glanced back, his weathered face creased with disbelief. "Maybe they're just heading to the creek, too. Water source, escape from fire. Makes sense." But Clara wasn't convinced it was that simple. Something had changed in that moment when Milo and the cub connected. Something profound and inexplicable. She could feel it in the air between them, in the way Willow watched her son with something like recognition. They reached the creek in minutes, the rushing water swollen from the rain. On the far bank stood a small weather-beaten shed where Silas kept emergency supplies. "There are shovels in there," he called over the sound of the water, "and fire blankets. We need to clear a line between the creek and the mill, soak everything we can." Clara carefully set Milo down on a relatively dry patch of ground beneath a sheltering pine. "Stay right here, baby," she instructed firmly. "Mommy needs to help Mr. Silas." To her surprise, Milo didn't protest or try to follow. He simply sat down, his eyes moving between Clara and the bears that had paused at the edge of the clearing. Silas splashed across the creek, retrieving the supplies they needed. He handed Clara a shovel, and together they began clearing a swath of ground, digging down to bare soil to create a barrier the fire couldn't easily cross. The work was backbreaking, made more difficult by the rain and mud, but they pushed on, driven by the knowledge of what was at stake. From where they worked, they could see smoke still rising from the mill, darker now against the gray sky. Fire crews should be here soon, Silas grunted, pausing to wipe rain from his eyes. But even with this downpour, that old building has enough fuel to keep burning for hours. Clara nodded grimly, her arms aching with fatigue as she dug another shovelful of earth. She glanced back frequently to check on Milo, reassured each time to find him exactly where she'd left him, seemingly content to watch their work. What she wasn't prepared for was the sight that greeted her on her third check. Willow and her cub had moved closer, settling just a few yards from Milo. The massive mother bear lay on her stomach, her cub nestled against her side, both watching the toddler with what could only be described as curiosity. Clara's shovel faltered mid-swing. "Silas," she whispered, "look." The old caretaker turned, his eyes widening at the tableau before them. "Holy." "Keep working," Clara said, forcing herself to turn back to their task. "They're not hurting him. We need to finish this before the fire spreads." They redoubled their efforts, the firebreak growing steadily longer. In the distance, they could hear the wail of sirens approaching. Zara had gotten through, help was coming. But the fire was moving faster than anticipated. A sudden gust of wind sent burning embers sailing over the tops of the trees, igniting new blazes beyond their half-finished firebreak. "It's jumping the line," Silas shouted, pointing to where flames had appeared on their side of the clearing. Clara's heart seized with fear. The new fire was between them and Milo, cutting off their direct path back to him. "Milo!" she screamed, already running, not toward the firebreak but straight toward the flames, heedless of the danger. Silas caught her arm, holding her back with surprising strength. "You can't go through there," he insisted. "We'll go around." "There's no time." Clara fought against his grip, panic overwhelming reason. Her son was alone, separated from her by a growing wall of fire, with wild bears just yards away from him. It was every mother's nightmare turned terrifyingly real. But what happened next defied explanation. Willow rose to her feet, her massive form casting a shadow over Milo as the flames approached. Instead of fleeing with her cub, the mother bear positioned herself between the fire and the toddler. Then, with a deliberate movement that could not be mistaken for anything other than intentional, she began to dig. Her powerful front paws tore into the earth, flinging dirt and mud onto the approaching flames with astonishing efficiency. Where the soil landed, the fire sputtered and died, unable to find purchase in the wet ground. The cub, as if following its mother's example, began to dig as well, its smaller paws creating a shower of mud that further dampened the ground between Milo and the fire. Clara stopped struggling against Silas's grip, transfixed by the sight. They're putting out the fire," she whispered. "They're protecting him." Silas's arm dropped to his side, his weathered face slack with wonder. "I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't seeing it with my own eyes." They watched as Willow systematically smothered the flames that threatened Milo, working with a purpose and intelligence that defied conventional understanding of wild animal behavior. The cub stayed close to its mother, mimicking her actions with an almost playful energy. And Milo, sweet innocent Milo, clapped his hands in delight, completely unafraid of the massive creatures that had appointed themselves his protectors. The sound of breaking branches announced the arrival of the fire crews, led by Zara and the local forest ranger, Harlan Michaels. They crashed through the underbrush, tools and equipment at the ready, only to stop short at the scene before them. "Don't shoot!" Clara called out instantly, seeing Harlan reach for his tranquilizer gun. "The bears are helping." "Helping?" Harlan echoed incredulously. "What in the—" "Just watch," Silas interrupted, pointing to where Willow continued her methodical work, the fire line receding wherever she turned her attention. The fire crew stood frozen, transfixed by the impossible sight. Years of training told them to drive the bears away, to rescue the child seemingly in danger. But the evidence before their eyes told a different story. "I've never seen anything like it," Harlan admitted, lowering his weapon. "It's like they understand." With the arrival of the fire crew, the battle against the blaze shifted in their favor. Professional firefighters quickly established control lines, their equipment and training making short work of what remained of the spreading fire. The rain, still falling steadily, helped douse the flames that had escaped the mill. Through it all, Willow and her cub remained near Milo, only moving aside when Clara was finally able to reach her son. She gathered him into her arms, tears of relief mingling with the rain on her face. "You're okay, baby," she murmured, checking him over frantically. "You're okay." Milo babbled happily, pointing over her shoulder at the bears. "Fwend," he said clearly, the word startling Clara with its clarity. "Fwend." She turned to find Willow watching them, the great bear's expression unreadable, yet somehow gentle. The cub peeked around its mother's leg, making a soft chuffing sound that might almost have been a greeting. "Yes," Clara whispered, looking into Willow's intelligent eyes. "Friend." As the danger receded and the excitement died down, the strangeness of what had occurred began to sink in for everyone present. The fire crews worked efficiently, but cast frequent glances at the bears who showed no sign of retreating into the forest. Zara approached cautiously, her researcher's curiosity warring with her respect for the wild animals. "This is unprecedented," she murmured to Clara. "Bears don't behave this way, especially not with human children." "I know," Clara replied, still holding Milo close. "I can't explain it." "The bond between the cub and your son." Zara hesitated, searching for words. It's like they recognized something in each other. Something. Kindred. Harlan joined them, his official forest ranger hat dripping with rain. "We need to document this," he said, his voice low with wonder. "No one would believe it otherwise." "No," Clara said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence in her tone. "No documentation, no reports." "But this could be groundbreaking for our understanding of bear behavior," Zara protested. The scientific community would turn this forest into a research zoo," Clara interrupted. "They'd capture Willow and her cub, study them, maybe even take them away from their home. Is that what you want?" Zara fell silent, her enthusiasm dampened by Clara's words. Silas stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. "Clara's right. Some things aren't meant for scientific journals and news reports. Some things are just miracles." Harlan looked unconvinced. "As the forest ranger, I'm obligated to report any unusual wildlife interactions, especially ones involving children." "And what exactly would you report?" Silas challenged. "That, in the middle of fighting a forest fire, you saw bears helping? Who'd believe that without proof?" The ranger shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I suppose you can report that bears were sighted during the fire," Clara suggested. "But there's no need to mention their behavior or Milo's involvement. Please." Harlan studied her face, then looked at Milo, who was watching the cub with undisguised fascination. Finally, he nodded. "All right, for the boy's sake and for the bears. But you all need to clear out of here once the fire's completely contained. This is still their territory." Clara nodded gratefully, understanding the concession he was making. Willow and her cub deserved to live their lives in peace without becoming scientific curiosities or internet sensations. As the fire crews continued their work, the rain finally began to ease, the dark clouds breaking to reveal patches of blue sky. The immediate danger had passed, though the mill would continue to smolder for hours. Slowly, the tension of the day began to dissolve, replaced by a weary sort of wonder. Clara sat on a fallen log, Milo in her lap, watching as the cub playfully batted at puddles while Willow kept a watchful eye on both young ones. "I still can't believe what I saw," Zara murmured, settling beside them. "In all my years of bear research, sometimes the world has more magic than we give it credit for," Clara replied softly, stroking Milo's damp hair. "Sometimes miracles happen right in front of us." As if in response to her words, the cub looked up from its puddle play, making direct eye contact with Milo. The toddler giggled and waved, a sound of pure joy that seemed to brighten the clearing. And to everyone's amazement, the cub raised one paw and moved it back and forth, in what could only be described as a wave in return. Willow huffed softly, rising to her feet in a smooth motion that belied her great size. She gave Clara one last long look, mother to mother, then gently nudged her cub. With reluctance clear in its movements, the little bear turned away from Milo and followed its mother toward the deeper forest. At the edge of the trees, the cub paused, looking back one more time. Milo waved again, his small hand moving enthusiastically. "Bye-bye, friend," he called, the words clear despite his limited vocabulary. The cub made a soft sound in response, then disappeared into the undergrowth with its mother, leaving behind only rustling leaves and paw prints in the mud. A profound silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the distant sounds of the fire crews finishing their work. Something miraculous had happened here today, something beyond explanation or scientific understanding. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Zara asked quietly. Clara looked down at Milo, who was still staring at the spot where the bears had vanished, a peaceful smile on his face. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I think they've changed us forever." Silas nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "Some encounters leave marks on our souls," he said, "the kind that never truly fade." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the forest to its rightful inhabitants, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Silas was right. Whatever had happened between Milo and the bear cub, whatever mysterious connection had formed between them, had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. It was the kind of story that would be whispered around campfires for generations to come. A reminder that in this world of science and reason, there were still moments of pure magic to be found. Moments where the barrier between human and wild briefly dissolved, revealing the ancient kinship that all living beings once shared. As they made their way back toward town, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting golden light across the damp forest. Steam rose from the ground, creating an ethereal mist that swirled around their ankles. The air smelled clean and new, the scent of pine and wet earth replacing the acrid smoke that had filled their lungs earlier. "I should get Milo home," Clara said, adjusting her son in her arms. Though the danger had passed, she couldn't bring herself to put him down, to break the physical connection between them. "He needs dry clothes and something warm to eat. I can give you a ride," Silas offered, gesturing toward his truck, which Zara had driven back from town with the fire crews. "Least I can do after all this excitement." Clara nodded gratefully. The events of the day had left her drained, her muscles aching from tension and exertion. The thought of walking all the way back to her small cabin on the edge of town was overwhelming. "I'd like to check in tomorrow, if that's all right," Zara said as they reached the old truck. Her researcher's enthusiasm had been tempered by the day's events, but Clara could still see the burning curiosity in her eyes. "Just to make sure Milo's doing okay after all this." Clara hesitated, then nodded. Despite her protective instincts, she knew Zara meant well. That would be fine, but no recording equipment, no official documentation. Understood, Zara agreed, though Clara could see it pained her to make such a promise. The scientist in her wanted to share this remarkable encounter with the world, but the human in her recognized the importance of keeping it private. Just a friendly visit. They parted ways at the edge of the forest, Zara heading back to check on her equipment at what remained of the mill, while Clara and Milo climbed into Silas's truck. The old caretaker was uncharacteristically quiet as he drove, his weathered hands tapping occasionally on the steering wheel as if keeping time with thoughts Clara couldn't hear. "Penny for your thoughts," she said finally, as they turned onto the narrow dirt road that led to her cabin. Silas's eyes, the pale blue of a winter sky, flickered to her face, then back to the road. "Been thinking about something my grandmother used to tell me. She was half Cherokee, you know." Clara didn't know, but she nodded encouragingly. "She used to say that children can see things we can't," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a sacred secret. "That before they learn our ways of looking at the world, they can still see the truth of things, the connections that bind all living creatures together." Milo had fallen asleep in Clara's arms, his face peaceful, one small hand clutching the collar of her muddy shirt. "You think that's what happened today?" she asked, equally quiet. "Milo could see something we couldn't?" Silas shrugged, the gesture somehow encompassing both dismissal and profound agreement. "I think your boy and that cub recognized each other, not as human and bear, but as kindred spirits, I guess you could say." The truck bumped over a rut in the road, but Milo didn't stir, exhausted from the day's excitement. "My grandmother would have called it animal medicine," Silas added after a moment. "Said some people are born with a special connection to certain creatures. Called them spirit guides in her language." Clara looked down at her sleeping son, trying to imagine him with some mystical connection to bears. It seemed fantastical, the stuff of children's stories or ancient legends, and yet, after what she'd witnessed today— "Whatever it was," she said softly, "I'm just grateful everyone is safe." Silas nodded, guiding the truck around the final bend in the road. Clara's cabin came into view, a small, neat structure of weathered wood and stone nestled among towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone had been there, probably one of her neighbors who had a spare key for emergencies. "Looks like word travels fast," Silas commented, parking in front of the cabin. "Bet that's Eliza Harrison's doing. That woman knows everything that happens in this town before it happens." Clara smiled despite her exhaustion. Eliza, the elderly postmistress of Pine Hollow, was indeed the nexus of the town's informal communication network. If something occurred within 50 miles, Eliza not only knew about it, but had already formed 3 opinions and baked a casserole in response. "I appreciate it, whatever the source," Clara said, carefully shifting Milo as she reached for the door handle. "Right now, a warm house sounds like heaven." Silas helped her from the truck, insisting on carrying her mud-caked research equipment to the porch. "You get that boy inside and dried off," he instructed. "I'll stop by tomorrow with some fresh firewood. Your pile's looking low, and they're calling for another storm." Clara thanked him, touched by the casual kindness that was so characteristic of Pine Hollow's residents. In the 2 years since she'd moved here to conduct her research, the small community had embraced her and Milo with an openness she hadn't expected. Inside, the cabin was warm, and smelled of fresh bread. A note on the kitchen table confirmed Clara's suspicions. Eliza had indeed been there, leaving behind a loaf of sourdough and a pot of hearty stew simmering on the back of the wood stove. The familiar, comforting scent brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. She carried Milo to his small bedroom, gently changing his damp clothes for warm pajamas. He stirred slightly but didn't fully wake, his little body limp with exhaustion. When she tucked him into bed, his eyes opened briefly, unfocused and dreamy. "Bear," he murmured, the word startlingly clear. "Nice bear?" "Yes, baby," Clara whispered, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Nice bear. Go to sleep now." He closed his eyes again, his breathing deepening almost immediately. Clara stood watching him for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened. Her son, barely more than a baby, had somehow connected with a wild bear cub in a way that defied explanation. And that connection had not only saved the cub's life, but potentially prevented a devastating forest fire. It was too much to comprehend all at once. With a weary sigh, she retreated to the bathroom, peeling off her own filthy clothes and stepping into a hot shower. As the water washed away the mud and smoke residue, she tried to order her thoughts, to make sense of the inexplicable events of the day. By the time she emerged, wrapped in her oldest, softest robe, the sky outside had darkened once more. Not with storm clouds this time, but with the gentle approach of evening. She moved to the kitchen, ladling some of Eliza's stew into a bowl, grateful for the simple nourishment. A soft tap at the door interrupted her first bite. Setting down her spoon with a sigh, she tightened her robe and went to answer it. Harlan Michaels, the forest ranger, stood on her porch, his official hat in his hands. His expression was troubled, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than they had been earlier. "Evening, Clara," he said, his voice low. "Sorry to disturb you, but I thought you should know right away." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran through her. "What's happened?" Harlan glanced past her, into the cabin. "The boy asleep?" Clara nodded, her anxiety mounting. "Harlan, what is it?" The ranger sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "We found tracks around the mill site, while we were cleaning up." "Tracks?" Clara repeated, not understanding his concern. "You mean from the bears? We knew they were there." "Not just the mama and cub," Harlan clarified, his voice dropping even lower. "Different tracks, bigger. And they weren't fresh like the others. They'd been there a while, partially covered by leaves and such." Clara frowned, trying to follow his logic. "So there was another bear in the area. That's not unusual, is it?" "It wasn't just any bear, Clara." Harlan's expression grew even more grave. "The size and pattern of the prints, we're pretty sure it was Old Shadow." Clara felt her blood run cold. Even after only 2 years in Pine Hollow, she knew the legend of Old Shadow, an enormous male black bear, far larger than average, with a distinctive white patch on his chest. He was known to be aggressive, responsible for several livestock killings, and at least 2 human attacks in the last decade. Most locals believed he was simply a myth, a boogeyman created to keep hikers on marked trails. But rangers like Harlan knew better. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Harlan nodded grimly. "As sure as I can be without seeing him. The tracks were at least a week old, but the size matches previous prints we've documented. And there was fur caught on some brambles nearby, black with white tips. It's being sent to the lab, but you're confident it's him," Clara finished. "What troubles me," Harlan continued, "is that Old Shadow is known to be highly territorial. He doesn't typically share his hunting grounds with other bears, especially not females with cubs." Clara's mind raced, trying to process this new information. So, why would Willow and her cub be in his territory? Wouldn't that be dangerous for them? Exactly, Harlan confirmed. Unless what? The ranger hesitated, as if reluctant to voice his suspicion. Unless the cub is his. Clara stared at him, momentarily speechless. Would that be unusual? Male bears don't typically have anything to do with their offspring, Harlan explained. In fact, they're known to kill cubs that aren't theirs, and sometimes even their own if food is scarce. But Old Shadow, there's always been something different about him. The locals have stories. He trailed off, looking embarrassed at veering into folklore rather than scientific fact. What kind of stories? Clara pressed. Harlan shrugged uncomfortably. Just old tales, that he's smarter than other bears, that he can disappear like a shadow, hence the name, that he understands human speech. He shook his head, dismissing the notions. Campfire stories mostly. But the scientific fact remains. If that cub is his offspring, and if he's in the area, you and Milo need to be extra cautious. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. You think he might come here, to the cabin? I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, Harlan said carefully. But bears have excellent memories and keen senses. If Old Shadow is the cub's father, and if he was watching today. He didn't need to finish the thought. Clara understood the implication clearly. If the massive male had witnessed the strange connection between his cub and Milo, there was no telling how he might react. I've got rangers patrolling the area tonight, Harlan assured her, seeing the fear in her eyes. And we're setting up trail cameras to monitor for any unusual activity. It's just a precaution, but I'd feel better if you kept Milo inside for a few days. No forest excursions, even for your research. Clara nodded numbly, her mind already cataloging the security features of her small cabin. The doors and windows were sturdy, designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters, but would they hold against a determined bear? Especially one as legendarily powerful as Old Shadow. I'll check in tomorrow, Harlan promised, settling his hat back on his head. Try not to worry too much. The chances of him approaching a human dwelling are slim. I just wanted you to be aware. After he left, Clara locked the door and methodically checked every window, drawing the curtains tight against the gathering darkness. Her uneaten stew sat forgotten on the table as she moved through the cabin, her mind churning with new anxieties. She checked on Milo, relieved to find him still sleeping peacefully, one arm curled around his favorite stuffed animal. Ironically, a small brown bear his grandfather had given him when he was born. Clara gently touched his cheek, marveling at the innocence of his expression, the complete absence of fear or worry. How strange, she thought, that this tiny being had somehow communicated with a wild predator today, had somehow bridged a gap that most humans spent their lives unable to cross. Back in the living room, Clara stoked the fire in the wood stove, then settled into the rocking chair beside it, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Outside, the wind had picked up, whispering through the pine needles, occasionally gusting strongly enough to make the cabin creak. Ordinary sounds, familiar and usually comforting, but tonight they set her nerves on edge. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Willow standing protectively over Milo, digging in the earth to create a firebreak between her son and danger. She saw the cub and Milo looking at each other with recognition that defied explanation. And now, superimposed over these images, she saw a massive shadow moving through the trees, watching, calculating, approaching. A sharp crack from outside jolted her fully awake. She hadn't realized she'd dozed off, but the fire had died down to embers, casting the room in dim, reddish light. The wind had intensified, now howling around the eaves of the cabin. Clara listened intently, trying to determine if the sound had been merely a branch breaking in the wind or something more concerning. For several long minutes, there was nothing but the wind and the settling of the cabin's timbers. Then she heard it, a deep, huffing breath, directly outside the living room window. Her heart hammering, Clara rose silently from the rocking chair, moving on stockinged feet to the gun cabinet in the corner. Like many residents of these remote mountains, she kept a rifle for protection, though she'd never had cause to use it against anything more threatening than the occasional timber rattler. With trembling hands, she unlocked the cabinet and withdrew the rifle, loading it with practiced movements that her grandfather had drilled into her during childhood summers spent at his ranch in Montana. The weight of it was both familiar and strange, a tool she respected, but had hoped never to need. Another huff outside, followed by the distinctive sound of claws scraping against wood. Not the walls of the cabin, but the trunk of the old pine that grew just outside the window. Its branches nearly touching the roof, Clara moved to Milo's room, positioning herself between the window and his bed. The rifle held ready, but pointed at the floor. She wouldn't fire unless absolutely necessary. The sound would not only terrify Milo, but would likely bring every ranger in the vicinity racing to her cabin, potentially escalating any confrontation. Minutes stretched into an hour, the only sounds those of the wind, Milo's soft breathing, and the occasional creak from the pine tree outside. Whatever had been there, if anything truly had been, seemed to have moved on. Finally, her arms aching from tension, Clara lowered the rifle. She was being paranoid, letting Harlan's warning and the strange events of the day cloud her judgment. The sound had probably been nothing more than a raccoon or a porcupine, seeking shelter from the rising wind. She returned the rifle to its cabinet, then checked all the locks once more before returning to the rocking chair. This time, she kept the small oil lamp on the side table lit, its gentle glow pushing back the shadows just enough to soothe her frayed nerves. Despite her determination to remain vigilant, the exhaustion of the day eventually claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep right there in the chair, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders. She dreamed of bears, not frightening, but moving through a sunlit forest with purpose and grace. In the dream, Milo rode on the back of an enormous black bear with a white chest patch, his little hands buried in the thick fur, his face alight with joy. The bear carried him with careful steps, protective and gentle. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin windows, the storm having passed during the night. Clara stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her neck from sleeping upright. The cabin was quiet except for the cheerful chirping of birds outside. She made her way to Milo's room, pushing open the door softly in case he was still asleep. The bed was empty. For one terrible moment, Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then her eyes fell on the window, closed but unlocked. The window that had definitely been locked when she checked it the night before. "Milo," she called, her voice strangled with sudden panic. "Milo, where are you?" She rushed through the cabin, checking every room, every closet, even places too small for a toddler to hide. Nothing. Back in his bedroom, she noticed what she'd missed in her initial panic, tiny, muddy footprints on the floor beneath the window, leading from the bed. Not large enough to be an adult's, but too large to be Milo's. And mixed with them, barely visible on the dark wood floor, were a few tufts of black fur. Clara's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, dialing Harlan's number with clumsy fingers. "Michaels," he answered on the second ring, his voice professional but tinged with morning grogginess. "He's gone," Clara choked out, her throat constricting around the words. Milo's gone, Harlan. Someone's taken him. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't touch anything. Don't move anything. I'm calling in the search team now. Clara ended the call and sank to the floor beside the small footprints, her mind unable to process what was happening. Who would take her son? Why? And what did the bear fur have to do with it? True to his word, Harlan arrived in less than 10 minutes, accompanied by 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office. They moved through the cabin with professional efficiency, examining the window, the footprints, collecting samples of the fur for analysis. No signs of forced entry, one of the deputies noted, inspecting the window latch. This was unlocked from the inside. That's impossible, Clara insisted, her voice hollow with shock. I checked every window last night, twice. Harlan gave her a sympathetic look but didn't contradict the deputy's assessment. Is there anyone who has a key to your cabin? Anyone who might have come by early this morning? Clara shook her head. Just Eliza Harrison for emergencies, and Silas. But neither of them would... She couldn't even finish the thought, the notion too absurd to voice. The second deputy emerged from examining the area outside Milo's window. Got tracks, he announced grimly. Small adult, probably female based on the stride length and shoe size, and something else. He hesitated, glancing at Harlan. Something big was out there too, recent prints. Bear? Harlan asked sharply. The deputy nodded. Looks like it, and based on the size, could be our friend from the North Ridge. Old Shadow. Clara felt the room spin around her, Harlan's warning from the previous night echoing in her ears. I don't understand, she whispered, gripping the doorframe for support. Are you saying someone took Milo and there was a bear outside? Or that the bear? She couldn't even articulate the horrific possibility. The tracks tell a story, the first deputy said, his voice gentler now. The human tracks and the bear tracks are side by side in places, moving in the same direction. But there's no signs of struggle, no blood or other evidence of an attack. So, someone took my son and the bear followed them? Clara tried to make sense of what she was hearing. Or the bear was already here and someone came to, what? Save Milo? Harlan exchanged looks with the deputies, a silent communication passing between them that Clara couldn't interpret. There's something else you should see, the second deputy said after a moment. He led them out the front door and around to the side of the cabin where Milo's window was located. There, pressed into the soft earth beneath the window, was a child's handprint, Milo's small fingers clearly outlined in the mud, and beside it, unmistakable despite the passing hours, was the print of a bear cub's paw. I don't understand, Clara repeated, staring at the 2 prints side by side. What does this mean? Harlan crouched down, studying the marks with narrowed eyes. It means your son wasn't taken, he said slowly. At least, not in the way we initially thought. Then where is he? Clara demanded, her voice rising with renewed panic. If someone didn't break in and kidnap him, where would he go in the middle of the night? The forest ranger stood, his expression troubled. I think he went with them willingly. Them? Them who? Clara was nearly shouting now, her fear turning to anger at the cryptic responses. The bears, Harlan said simply, and whoever was with them. While the deputies radioed for additional search teams, Harlan guided Clara back inside, sitting her down at the kitchen table and pressing a cup of strong coffee into her trembling hands.